Have you ever noticed how much of life is spent chasing? Chasing approval, chasing affection, chasing the moment when, finally, someone else will confirm our worth. From childhood onward, many of us are taught, directly or silently, that our value depends on how much love we can attract from others. We grow up believing that if no one chooses us, we are incomplete, and so the chase begins. We learn to perform, to please, to adapt ourselves into shapes that will be admired. We lose sleep waiting for a message. We measure our beauty in someone else's glance. We believe love is always out there, always in someone else's hands, and always something we must run toward. But what happens when the running stops? What happens when one day the exhaustion of chasing becomes heavier than the fear of being alone? Carl Jung would say that such a moment is not the end of love, but the beginning of something far deeper. Because the chase itself is an illusion. What we are chasing is not another body, not another pair of eyes, not another promise of affection. What we are chasing is the reflection of the love we have not yet given ourselves. And so when you stop chasing, the silence is not emptiness. It is the soul's first whisper. It is not loneliness. It is the clearing of space. The nervous system that once pulsed with anxiety begins to settle. The eyes that once scanned the horizon for validation begin to turn inward. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to hear what had always been waiting for you, your own voice. At first, this silence may feel unbearable, because if you have lived your whole life chasing love, then not chasing feels like absence, failure, abandonment. But in Jungian psychology, this is the moment when the unconscious begins to awaken. What you once projected outward, your need, your longing, your wounds, you now begin to see within yourself. Jung said, "Everything that we do not make conscious returns to us as fate." The chase is fate, repeating itself in cycle after cycle. But the silence after the chase, that is consciousness. Think of a candle in a crowded room. The flame is there, but the noise and movement of the crowd distracts the eye. You cannot feel its warmth because your attention is scattered. But if the room empties, if everyone leaves, if the noise dies down, you suddenly see the flame clearly. Its glow has always been there. Its warmth has always been waiting. The silence did not remove anything. It revealed what had always been present. This is what happens when you stop chasing love. The crowd of projections leaves, the noise of desperation fades, and what remains is the steady flame of the self. Jung would call this the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole. Not whole because someone else finally completes you, but whole because you stop running away from yourself. Individuation begins when you realize that the love you were chasing was a reflection of your own disowned soul. So what happens when you stop chasing? At first there is unease, even fear. The old self panics, wondering, if I don't run after love, will I ever be loved at all? But underneath the panic, something else begins to breathe. A strange calm arrives. A feeling of power, subtle but undeniable, takes root. Because you are no longer begging, you are no longer bargaining, you are no longer molding yourself to be chosen. You are simply there, present, whole, alive. And paradoxically, that is when love begins to change. No longer the frantic grasping at crumbs, no longer the endless cycle of highs and lows, but something quieter, steadier, richer. A love that flows toward you without being chased. A love that is not sought, but recognized. The chase, Jung would say, belongs to the ego, the restless part of us that cannot sit still, that fears rejection more than anything else. But the stillness after the chase belongs to the self. And when you stop running, you give the self permission to lead. And what the self seeks is not possession, not performance, not approval, but truth. This is where the story begins. The story of what really happens when you stop chasing love. When the chase ends, what comes first is silence. Not the kind of silence that comforts, at least not right away. At first it is raw, unsettling, almost frightening. The phone doesn't buzz the way it used to. The nights feel longer. The absence of someone else's gaze feels like a void. You may sit in your room staring at the ceiling, asking yourself, did I make a mistake? Did I walk away too soon? What if love never finds me again? This is the voice of habit, because chasing love becomes a rhythm, a constant hum in the background of life. Even when you're tired, even when you know the chase leaves you empty, there is something comforting about the noise. To sit without it feels unnatural. The silence after desire feels, at first, like loss. But Jung would tell us that what feels like loss is often the first sign of transformation. The silence is not punishment, it is invitation. The unconscious, once drowned out by longing and projection, finally has a chance to speak. What once was hidden begins to rise. Memories surface. Old wounds ache again. Questions that you have avoided for years come knocking. Who am I when I am not loved by another? What do I desire when no one is watching? What is left of me when all the masks fall away? This silence is the gateway to individuation. Jung described individuation as the path toward wholeness, the process of uniting your conscious self with the hidden depths of your unconscious. And here is the paradox. It often begins not in fullness, but in emptiness. When you stop filling every gap with pursuit, the emptiness reveals what you were running from. Think of a riverbed when the flood recedes. For a while the waters raged so loudly that you could not see the bottom. You thought the river was endless. But when the waters fall silent, you see the stones that have always been there, shaped by years of current, hidden beneath the surface. The silence of not chasing love is like that. The flood of pursuit calms. The stones of your soul appear. At first those stones may look jagged, loneliness, fear, abandonment. The sharp edges of rejection still cut your hands. But if you dare to keep looking, you notice other stones, smooth ones, polished by time. Strength you didn't know you had. Creativity waiting for space. Intuitions that had been drowned out by noise. Desires not for another person, but for life itself. These too were always within you. You simply couldn't see them while the river roared. And something else happens in this silence. The energy you once poured into chasing begins to turn inward. Jung often spoke of libido, not only as sexual energy, but as the raw force of the psyche, the life energy that fuels all growth. When you chase, that energy flows outward, scattered in pursuit of another's validation. But when you stop chasing, the libido withdraws, not to die, but to transform. It begins to feed the soul. Dreams become more vivid. Intuitions sharpen. You notice small details in the world that once escaped you. You feel alive in a way that has nothing to do with being loved by another. Society fears this silence because it cannot control it. The world is comfortable with people chasing, always needing, always molding themselves to be chosen. But the one who sits in silence, who does not beg, who no longer plays the game, that person becomes mysterious, unpredictable, untouchable, and yet deeply magnetic. Jung would say that this silence is the threshold of the shadow. All the parts of yourself that you denied in the pursuit of love begin to stir. The anger you swallowed, the sadness you ignored, the passions you sacrificed to be accepted, they rise up in the quiet. And though it is uncomfortable, it is also sacred, because only what is faced can be integrated, and only what is integrated can be transformed. So when the chase ends and the silence arrives, do not run from it. Sit with it. Listen. The silence is not absence, it is space. It is the space where the soul, long silenced by the noise of desire, finally begins to whisper. And what it whispers is not, "You are unworthy." What it whispers is, "You were always more than enough. You simply forgot." This is what happens when you stop chasing love. The silence that at first feels unbearable slowly reveals itself as a temple, and within that temple the soul begins to speak. Carl Jung taught that every person carries within them what he called the shadow. These are the parts of ourselves we repress, deny, or bury so deeply that we hardly know they exist. Yet, they do not disappear. They wait beneath the surface, shaping our choices from the dark. And nowhere does the shadow show itself more clearly than in the way we chase love. Think about it. Why do we pursue so frantically, even when the pursuit leaves us empty? Why do we bend ourselves into shapes we do not recognize, abandon our truth, sacrifice our boundaries, just to be chosen? Jung would say it is because our shadow drives the chase. The unhealed child in us, the one who was never fully seen, never fully valued, believes love must be hunted down. The unconscious wound whispers, "If I can just make them stay, then I will be whole." And so we run, not toward love, but toward the illusion that love will heal what we have not yet faced inside. The problem is this: no one outside of you can carry the weight of your shadow. And when you hand it to them, when you ask them to fix it, to fill it, to complete it, the relationship collapses under the pressure. At first, it may feel intoxicating, the rush of being desired, the comfort of being chosen, the temporary relief of feeling enough, but it never lasts. The old wound always returns, and the chase begins again, this time with someone new. Jung warned us, "What you do not make conscious appears in your life as fate." And this is the cruel cycle of chasing love. The face may change, the name may change, the story may change, but the pattern remains the same. Because the unconscious wound is still driving. Fate repeats until we choose to face it. This is why stopping the chase is such a radical act. When you stop running after love, you are no longer feeding the illusion. The shadow rises, yes. The old pain resurfaces. The loneliness feels sharper. The doubts scream louder. But this is not a sign of failure. It is the sign that you are finally meeting your shadow face to face. And in this confrontation, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see how much of what you called love was never truly love at all. It was bargaining. It was projection. It was the desperate attempt to find outside what had been missing inside. You see how often you confused attention with affection, desire with devotion, presence with permanence. You realize that many of the loves you chased were not chosen freely, but compulsively, pulled from you by the shadow's hunger. This realization can be painful. It may feel like betrayal, as though your entire history of relationships was built on illusion, but Jung would remind us, facing the shadow is never easy. It burns, it unsettles, but it also liberates, because once you see the illusion for what it is, you no longer need to repeat it. And something else begins to dawn in the silence after the chase. You begin to sense that real love cannot be chased, that what is truly meant for you cannot be forced, cannot be rushed, cannot be grasped with desperation. Real love is not about filling a hole in the soul. Real love is what flows naturally between two whole beings who have faced their shadows and chosen to meet, not to complete each other, but to walk side by side. The irony is that when you stop chasing, you actually prepare yourself for the possibility of real love. Because the chase is noise, it drowns out the subtle frequency of what is authentic. But when you rest, when you face the shadow, when you let go of the illusion, your field clears. You become someone who does not demand, but invites, who does not cling, but allows, who does not seek to be completed, but radiates completion. And that is the kind of presence real love recognizes instantly. Jung often described individuation as the integration of opposites, light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, persona and self. When you stop chasing, you are living out this integration. You are no longer split between the mask you present to be loved and the wound you hide in the dark. You begin to gather all of yourself into one whole. And that wholeness, even before another soul enters your life, feels like love. So what happens when you stop chasing love? You face the shadow. You break the illusion. And though it hurts at first, what emerges is freedom. The freedom to see clearly, to choose wisely, and to finally understand the difference between love as hunger and love as truth. Carl Jung believed that the greatest journey a human can take is not out into the world, but inward, toward the self. He called this process individuation, the path by which a person becomes whole, no longer split between who they truly are and who they pretend to be. And one of the surest gateways into individuation is this: the moment you stop chasing love. Why? Because chasing is an act of exile. Every time you run after someone else's affection, you abandon a part of yourself. You silence your own needs to please them. You ignore your own voice to hear theirs. You hide your wounds so they will not leave you. You adapt, bend, compromise, until finally you can no longer recognize the one in the mirror. In the pursuit of being loved, you lose yourself. But the moment you stop chasing, you turn back toward home. At first it feels strange, even terrifying. You sit alone with yourself and realize you do not know this person. You wonder, what do I like? What do I want? What do I need? Questions that should have been simple feel foreign, because for so long your focus was outward. But this is precisely where individuation begins, with the awkward, uncertain turning inward. Jung described the self as the organizing center of the psyche, the deep well of wisdom and wholeness that lives beneath the masks we wear. Most people live on the surface in the realm of the persona, the carefully crafted image we show to the world. But the self waits underneath, speaking in dreams, in symbols, in quiet intuitions that we often ignore while we are too busy chasing approval. When the chase ends, however, those whispers grow louder. You notice the patterns in your dreams, repeating images that seem to hold a message. You notice synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that guide you toward new choices. You notice your body speaking more clearly, a tightness in your chest when you are about to repeat an old mistake, a lightness in your breath when you choose something aligned. This is the self drawing you back. And as you listen, something shifts. What once felt like emptiness begins to feel like space. What once felt like loneliness begins to feel like solitude. Solitude is not absence, it is presence. Presence with yourself. And in that presence, you begin to discover treasures that no one else could give you. Creativity awakens, intuition sharpens, a sense of direction emerges that has nothing to do with being chosen and everything to do with choosing yourself. This does not mean you reject love. It means you no longer confuse love with survival. You no longer chase because you no longer believe that without someone else, you are nothing. You know now. You are already whole. And from that wholeness, love is transformed. Jung wrote that individuation is not about perfection, but about integration. It is about taking the broken, hidden, rejected parts of yourself and welcoming them back. The shadow, once faced, becomes a source of strength. The wounds, once honored, become wisdom. The loneliness, once feared, becomes the doorway to authenticity. And all of this becomes possible when you stop chasing and start listening. To stop chasing love is to step off the stage of performance. It is to lay down the masks and return to the rawness of your own being. At first, that rawness feels exposed, but over time, it feels powerful. Because you are no longer spending all your energy pretending. You are no longer living for the applause. You are no longer shrinking yourself into roles just to be desired. You are becoming whole. And here is the paradox. The more you turn toward yourself, the more magnetic you become to others. Because real attraction does not come from need. It comes from wholeness. People feel it. They sense when someone has come home to themselves. They sense the solidity, the groundedness, the quiet strength. It is rare and therefore irresistible. So this is what happens when you stop chasing love. You begin the journey of individuation. You leave behind the fragments, the illusions, the endless performance, and you step into the process of becoming whole. And though the path is not easy, though it is marked by silence, shadow, and solitude, it is the most important journey you will ever take. Because at the end of it, you do not just find love, you find yourself. When you stop chasing love, something remarkable begins to happen. You discover that attraction does not need to be manufactured. It does not require pursuit, performance, or persuasion. It arises naturally from stillness. In a world where everyone is running to be noticed, running to be liked, running to be chosen, stillness stands out. The one who does not chase becomes magnetic precisely because they are not trying. Jung would say this is the difference between living from the ego and living from the self. The ego runs endlessly, grasping, always afraid of being overlooked. The self rests in its own presence, knowing that what is true cannot be taken away. Think of the people you have admired most deeply. Were they the ones who demanded attention with noise and constant striving? Or were they the ones whose calm presence made you lean in without them ever asking you to? Stillness carries a gravitational pull. It whispers instead of shouts, but the whisper reaches farther than the loudest performance. When you stop chasing, you enter this field of stillness. Your energy shifts. You are no longer scattered, spilling yourself into every interaction. You are gathered, centered, and people notice. They may not be able to explain it, but they feel the difference. They call it confidence. They call it mystery. But in truth, it is something simpler: coherence. Your outer world finally matches your inner truth. This stillness also protects you, because when you no longer chase, you no longer accept crumbs. You no longer fall for illusions dressed as love. You see more clearly who is drawn to you for who you are, and who is drawn only to the mask you used to wear. Stillness filters. It repels what is shallow and invites what is real. Jung believed that when the unconscious becomes conscious, fate is transformed. The same is true here. Once you stop chasing, you stop repeating the old cycles, the relationships that drained you, the patterns that broke you. You begin to attract differently, not by effort, but by essence. So this is the quiet paradox. The moment you stop running after love is the moment you begin to attract it. Not the restless love that fades when the chase ends, but the steady, enduring kind that flows toward you naturally. Stillness does not mean absence, it means power. And in that power, you discover that love was never something to hunt. It was always something to meet. For most of life, love feels like need. We say, "I need you." We believe we cannot live without another's attention, another's presence, another's hand in ours. And so love becomes hunger, a grasping, restless reaching that leaves us emptier the more we feed it. But when you stop chasing, something extraordinary happens. The hunger quiets. And in its place, choice is born. Carl Jung reminded us that true transformation happens when we integrate what once controlled us unconsciously. When love was need, the unconscious shadow held the reins. Old wounds whispered, "You are not enough unless someone wants you." And so you obeyed. You ran. You clung. You sacrificed yourself just to feel whole for a moment. But once the chase ends, you begin to see the illusion. You realize you do not need love to survive. You desire it, yes, but your life does not collapse without it. You discover you can sit in silence and still breathe. You can walk alone and still feel grounded. You can wake up without a message from anyone and still find joy in the day ahead. This is freedom from need. And from that freedom, a new kind of love becomes possible. A love not born of desperation, but of abundance. A love chosen, not hunted. You are no longer saying, "I need you so I can feel alive." You are saying, "I am alive already. I choose to share this aliveness with you." Can you feel the difference? One is dependency, the other is devotion. This is why the love that appears after you stop chasing feels different. It is slower, deeper, steadier. It does not swing wildly between ecstasy and despair. It does not vanish when tested. Because it was never about filling a void. It was about the meeting of two souls who were already whole. Jung would call this individuation in action. When two people have stopped projecting their missing pieces onto one another, they can finally meet in truth. No longer savior and saved, no longer chaser and chased, simply two beings walking side by side. That is love born of choice. So when you stop chasing, you do not lose love. You free it. You give it space to emerge in its purest form, not need, but choice, not desperation, but devotion. And that kind of love is not fragile. It endures. Carl Jung often spoke of archetypes, primordial images that live in every soul, shaping how we experience life. And when you stop chasing love, one archetype begins to awaken powerfully within you, the archetype of wholeness. What does this look like in daily life? It is the quiet transformation that others can feel even before you speak. You are no longer restless, scanning the room for who might notice you. You are no longer rehearsing lines in your head, desperate to say the right thing. Instead, you carry yourself with a calm that says, "I am enough, even if no one here chooses me." This energy is magnetic, not because it begs for attention, but because it doesn't. People are drawn to what they cannot easily control. They are intrigued by presence that does not demand them, yet feels steady, alive, radiant. This is why Jung described individuation, the process of becoming whole, as not just a private journey, but one that reshapes how the world responds to you. Wholeness radiates. When you embody it, others sense stability in your energy, a coherence that makes them relax in your presence. You are not scattering yourself. You are gathered. And in a world where most people are fractured, always performing, always hiding, the wholeness you carry becomes irresistible. But here is the deeper truth. This magnetism is not about getting love at all. It is the byproduct of no longer needing to. You did not cultivate it to attract. You cultivated it because you finally came home to yourself. And that is why it works, because it is real. So when you stop chasing, you step into a new archetypal field, the self-revealed, the wholeness that does not beg, does not cling, does not perform. And this presence, without even trying, becomes magnetic. Love may flow toward you, but by then you will know it was never the goal. Wholeness itself was always the destination. There comes a moment, after the silence, after the shadow, after the long nights of learning to sit with yourself, when something inside finally shifts. What once felt like emptiness no longer feels like loss. What once felt like hunger no longer cries out for feeding. Instead, you discover a new kind of fullness, a wholeness that does not depend on anyone else. Carl Jung said that what we deny within ourselves controls us, but what we integrate transforms us. By stopping the chase, you have integrated what once drove you blindly. The fear of being unloved, the ache of abandonment, the longing for validation. All of these no longer dominate you. They are still there, yes. But now they live inside you as wisdom, not as chains. And with this integration comes the most profound transformation of all. Love is no longer hunger. It is overflow. You no longer reach outward with desperation, begging to be filled. You overflow from within, and what spills out is freely given. You love not because you are starving, but because you are alive. This changes everything. The kind of love you attract changes. The kind of relationships you accept changes. You no longer bargain for scraps because your soul knows its worth. You no longer confuse drama with passion because your heart no longer needs chaos to feel alive. You no longer chase because you understand that what is real will walk with you freely. And so love arrives differently. It comes slowly, quietly, like a stream finding its way through the earth. It comes not to complete you, but to accompany you. It comes not to fill your emptiness, but to meet your fullness. And when it does, you recognize it, not with panic or urgency, but with calm, because you know you were whole before it came, and you will remain whole if it goes. This is what happens when you stop chasing love. You discover that the love you were always searching for was not outside of you. It was within you, waiting for silence, waiting for space, waiting for you to stop running long enough to hear it. And when you find it, every other love in your life becomes clearer, purer, freer. So if you find yourself in the silence now, unsure, restless, tempted to run again, trust it. The silence is not absence. It is the ground of transformation. The shadow that rises is not punishment. It is your soul asking to be seen. And the wholeness that waits beyond the chase is not a dream. It is your birthright. Jung would tell you, the journey to the self is the journey to love, not the hungry love that clings, but the radiant love that flows from a soul that has come home. And once you have tasted that, you will never again confuse chasing with loving. You will never again mistake hunger for devotion. You will know love is not pursuit. Love is presence. Love is truth. Love is overflow.